Professor Loye Ashton from Tugaloo College. The title of his talk is Putting Gülen's Teachings into Practice, Understanding Hizmet as a Civil Society Nonviolent Peace-Building Movement. Professor Ashton.
Good afternoon. It's wonderful to be here with you today. I'm also currently teaching, and have been for about 10 years, at another HBCU that was instrumental in the civil rights movement, like Morehouse, and we consider ourselves very much a sister and brother institution to Morehouse. It's Tugaloo College in Jackson, Mississippi. We were the center of the civil rights movement for the state of Mississippi. This paper actually took a bit of an evolution, and I'll tell you what happened. Mustafa invited me to present back in January, and I very excitedly agreed because I had some ideas, some theoretical ideas that I've been working on, comparing King and Gülen. And my work is in the background of comparative theology. That's what I do. And so I had this idea. I would do this comparison. I would bring some ideas from Gandhi about Satyagraha. I would talk about, King's, Greg Moses's work on King's philosophy of nonviolence, shift that into Gülen. And then I would take some interviews from members of the movement to see how they thought about that. And then I would kind of wrap that up with some analysis about what's happening in Turkey. Well, that was kind of a ridiculously large and foolish idea. As I got into the project, I basically have abandoned all of my traditional academic theoretical work on this paper and just didn't even bring it with me because, to some extent, it's being done in better ways by my colleagues, and I can get to it in another place. Because what I discovered was, and you can go to the next slide, that the interviews were so rich that I really wanted the members to speak for themselves. I wanted you to hear their voices because as I got into them, I realized this is where the gold is. This is really where even though I've been researching the movement for over 10 years, I'm hearing things about people's motivation, spiritual motivation and spiritual connection to nonviolence that I've never really heard before until I put these questions to them. So the interview questions, well, actually, demographics are up here. Just some basic things, age, location. I tried to protect the identities as best I could of my interviewees. There's only 4 interviewees, so this isn't, huge quantitative statistical analysis. It's much more of a qualitative. And in fact, I find myself more in the role of a journalist than an academician. These are some of the questions. These are the questions that I did for this particular project. Just to give you an idea of what I was kind of looking for with respect to how do they become involved in the movement, what about Gülen appeals to them, how do they understand what nonviolence is, how does Gülen's thought figure into that? How do they put it into practice? How well do they think the movement executes that? And then what do they think about the future? So the first, just to give you a quick overview, the first interviewee was a woman from Mississippi who is involved in the movement, who's been working for about 15 years. She has an English certificate degree beyond high school. She does a lot of cooking for the movement and works very hard in the hospitality side of the dialogue programs that they do. She came from a Sunni family that was not too religious, but very democratic, and they were very supportive of whatever she wanted to do. The second interview was a 37-year-old man from Texas who is an educator and an instructional coordinator. He has a master's degree in chemistry, and he's currently working on a master's degree in theology at a seminary. He's been involved with the movement for about 25 years, since middle school, and he works as a dialogue representative and a program coordinator. Religious background, also Sunni. The third interviewee was a 46-year-old female, also from Mississippi, who is a program and budget manager. She has an engineering degree in chemistry from a top university in Turkey. She completed an MBA in the US and is working on a PhD now in business administration. She's also hoping, once she completes her PhD, to then go back to school and get an MDiv in Islamic and Christian dialogue. She's been involved in the movement for about 25 years again, and she comes from a religious family. Her father was an imam, and her grandfather was a mufti. The fourth interviewee, 47-year-old male from New York, who's an educator, a PhD in a scientific background, works in nonprofits, and has had about 30 years in the movement, Sunni background, relatively faithful family, but his extended family was more observant. So in getting into these questions, I really want to kind of read some of the transcriptions to you. So I'll do some analysis at the end, but I really want you to hear their voices. So if the language sounds a little strange, it's partly because I'm reading from their recording and not necessarily trying to change any kind of grammatical or linguistic things. So the first interview we said, when I asked her, how did you get involved in the movement? She said, well, my husband said I could do anything I wanted. She had had a spiritual crisis, but she didn't find what she was looking for in Turkey. It was only after she moved to the U.S. that she had an opportunity to learn about Gulen. I thought that was interesting because it kind of goes against some of our stereotypes that all of this begins in Turkey. Actually, some people who are Turkish discover the movement for the first time in the U.S. The second interviewee, when he answered this question, said that when he was in high school, he met tutors who were so helpful, and he couldn't understand that. Why were they doing so much for him and not asking for anything in return? He said they never wanted any money or anything, and then I realized that they only did it for one reason, to please God. And I said to myself, why do people help other people that they don't even know? It was so strange to me at the time. So he said, so I say it like this: now it is my turn. Since they helped me, now I'm going to help people that I don't even know. That is why I do it. The third interview, she also talked about the fact that when she was in university in Turkey, she had a difficult time finding a group that would be supportive. And she searched for a couple of years, couldn't find one that was very good, even though her younger brother attended one of the Gulen tutoring schools. But she said she didn't really pay attention to what her younger brother was doing because, in part, it was her younger brother, and in part, she was in college and had her own things to focus on. But then she realized later, after meeting a doctor friend of hers who was very active in the movement, that actually her brother had been trying to show her and teach her some things all along. She said, before I came to the U.S., I was working as a manager for a high-ranking public official in Turkey. I was a hard-working person. I would work 20 hours a day. I had a great career and a great reputation. But at that time, I didn't work on my life. I didn't help people around me. But my doctor friend showed me how, while I'm working on my life, at the same time, I can work for others to help other people. And then it dawned on me that I need to make my life more valuable. And then I kept learning more and more, and then I joined the movement, thanks to God. And then she said, after joining the Gulen movement, I became a better Muslim, I can say. Even my brother was a spoiled child, but after getting the courses from the Gulen school, he became a better person. He was trying to understand the people around him. And even though my father was an imam, whenever he told my brother that he should pray, my brother was not really praying, but acting as if he was praying. But after the Gulen school, he told me, oh, Abla, I need to try and pray more perfectly. He became a very understanding person. He was trying to help other people. When he went to the university, he told our family that he wanted to become a teacher so that he could help other students, even though he used to only think of himself. Now he is a principal of a school in northern Iraq, in Erbil. The fourth interviewee around this question said, when I saw in people that I met, they attracted me. It was a combination of personal spirituality and social action. This combination attracted me. I attended circles for spiritual conversations as an undergraduate student. In particular, becoming deeper in your spirituality in order to become a better Muslim and also to do something about the social issues in our society. So this combination, because I saw it in the actions of the people, it attracted me. It was hopeful. It was positive. It was not reactionary. It was looking forward to something, the improvement of society and being part of the solution. So then the next question, what about Gulen appeals to you? The first interviewee said, well, in my heart, I feel that I'm a better person now, after having been part of the movement. I'm more tolerant. I'm more open to people of other religions, other people from other countries. My window to the world is much better now in a good way. For example, when I describe the movement or Gulen's work, he is following the steps of the Prophet. To understand each other in a better way, we have to be patient with each other. What I learned from Gulen is that violence brings violence. We should always be tolerant. I learned from Gulen that my religion is actually very beautiful, even when the media makes people think that it is always bad. If you are a good Muslim, the way he taught us, then the people can see the nice way, the right way of being a Muslim, and not the stereotypes in the news. The second interview, he said, well, first of all, he lives what he says. Before he says something, he turns it into action. Then he teaches it. That is what struck me the most. He's able to interpret Islam from the time of the Prophet until today in the very best way without damaging the originality of the religion. In Islam, for instance, there is no compulsion, no pressure, no trying to make people convert. In Islam today, as you know, there are many wrong interpretations of Islam, extreme Islam, radical Islam. I found very peaceful, moderate, original message of peace in Mr. Gulen. He knows about Islam, he knows about modern science, he knows about poetry. He can give you a conference about medicine, he can give you a conference about pharmacy. His approach to humanity, to people, is very good. The third interviewee said, firstly, he is a great example for me. You know, some teachers, they are saying something meaningful, something beautiful, something very valuable, but if you look at their lives, you cannot actually see the reality that they're teaching about. In my religious high school, there were some teachers who said we should be good Muslims. Okay, so we're almost out of time. And I've only not even got into 20% of this interview. So I hope at some point that I can find a way to make this available so that you can read what these folks are saying I think in a more comprehensive way. But let's jump to the conclusions then. So we're going to power through all the rest of these questions, preliminary conclusions, which won't make a lot of sense because you actually haven't heard their interviews, but you can trust me on this. And the first one is textual sources and their ubiquity. One of the things that I discovered when asking the questions about nonviolence, which we didn't actually get to yet, but they said most of them didn't point to any particular sources in Gulen's thought for nonviolence. And they don't point to any obvious or popular textual sources for a philosophy of nonviolence. There doesn't seem to be any singular textual sources that Hizmet followers look to for inspiration about nonviolence, but rather the entirety of his teachings and his actions as a person. In other words, peacemaking and nonviolence permeate all of his teachings and are inseparable from who he is and how he acts. He embodies in everything he does and says deep humility, compassion, and respect for other people. Violence would be seen as completely counterproductive to his message. He is trying to interpret and translate the Quran for contemporary Muslims, not formulate a new constructive theological vision for pressing political issues of the day the way that King and Gandhi were doing. His interpretation of the faith is a deep wave of counter-radicalization to the message of politically militant Islam that advocates and justifies violence as a means of protecting Muslims from the decadence of the West. The second observation I had is this connection of attracting and joining to the practice of nonviolence. You can't actually disconnect what the participants think of nonviolence from why they were attracted to the Gulen movement in the first place. The social perfection of nonviolence is inseparable from this inward spiritual perfection that they were seeking in their own individual lives. So what you find here oftentimes is that people who are already gravitating towards peace building and nonviolent action found in the Gulen movement a very receptive home. Once they got into that movement, then they found supportive resources for how to nurture that and strengthen that in their own practice. And I think there are very interesting parallels here in recent Christianity with the Quakers, the Methodists, the Mennonites, and the Catholic worker peace movements for how, again, you connect individual personal piety with outward social sanctification in that sense. The third observation has to do with the high educational level of the participants. Again, this was not a huge cross study. It was only 4 people, but all of them had high school degrees or beyond. 2 of them, one of them a PhD, 3 of them had graduate degrees, and we're adding more to that. The educational background both attracts people to the movement as well as the movement encourages educational development of its members, just like it did with the nonviolence correlation. And it's clear how important it is for members of the movement to bring faith and reason together as ways of counterbalancing and complementing each other. And then lastly, nonviolence is a political imperative for democracy and justice for members of the movement. The movement cares about politics, but not for the purpose of wielding power. Practicing deep humility, openness, compassion, patience, tolerance, and service, these are all hallmark virtues that came out in every interview. are the traits of a Hizmet participant. Using violence to achieve any kind of political goal is unthinkable, and actually using violence even one time was mentioned by the participants as reasons for being excluded for the movement. It basically would be self-excommunication. Indeed, there is no desire for political power for the movement as such in the way that there is, for example, in the AKP. Yet, there are Hizmet folks involved in politics, and yes, in the past, many Hizmet movement volunteers voted for the AKP in elections, but that was for the purpose of moving Turkey into a better direction socially, democratically, and economically. Recent changes in the AKP since 2011 are causing many members of the movement to rethink whether or not that's still the right direction. Committing violence is a kind of, again, self-excommunication from the Hizmet movement. And in addition, the rule of law is paramount, and respect for legal authority of government restrains even non-violent civil disobedience. Hizmet is both a counter-radicalization movement in that it negates the negative and a positive peace-building community. Its followers view peace as part of God's will for humanity as both a blessing and as an achievement for true human perfection. Thank you.